The matches covered every surface like freshly fallen snow, hundreds of them, scattered across tables, chairs, and counters. Vincent Lombardi stood frozen in the doorway of his restaurant, his daughter Angela gripping his arm, both of them understanding the message perfectly. Tomorrow, these matches could become flames. Tomorrow, everything they'd built could burn. But to understand how Vincent Lombardi found himself staring at this silent threat, how an honest immigrant restaurant owner became the target of one of New York's most dangerous mobsters, we need to go back 3 weeks, to the night when 2 men in expensive suits walked through his door and changed his life forever. The autumn rain hammered against the grimy windows of Lombardi's kitchen on East 116th Street, turning the Harlem pavement into a mirror of neon signs and streetlights. Inside, the smell of simmering tomato sauce and fresh bread should have been comforting, but tonight it mixed with something else: fear. Vincent Lombardi wiped down the wooden counter for the 3rd time in 10 minutes, his calloused hands trembling slightly. At 52, he'd spent 30 years building this restaurant from nothing, brick by brick, recipe by recipe. The framed photograph behind the register showed him as a younger man, standing proudly beside his late wife on opening day, both of them smiling with that particular optimism that only immigrants chasing the American dream possessed. That dream felt very far away now. The bell above the door chimed, and Vincent's stomach dropped. 2 men walked in, shaking rain from their fedoras. They weren't customers. Customers didn't wear hand-tailored suits in a neighborhood like this. Customers didn't have that predatory way of surveying a room, cataloging exits and counting heads. "Mr. Lombardi," the first man said, his voice smooth as expensive whiskey. He was tall, lean, with a face that might have been handsome if not for the coldness in his pale blue eyes. "I'm Eddie Walsh. This is my associate, Tony." Tony was shorter, broader, with hands like hammers and a nose that had been broken more than once. He said nothing, just positioned himself near the door. "We're closed," Vincent said, though the open sign still glowed in the window. "That's all right. This isn't a social call." He pulled out a chair and sat down uninvited, placing a leather-bound ledger on the table. "We represent the Metropolitan Restaurant and Cafeteria Workers Union. You've heard of us?" Vincent had heard. Every restaurant owner in New York had heard. The union was Dutch Schultz's latest racket, a brilliant scheme wrapped in the legitimate language of labor rights. The Dutchman had muscled his way into the Restaurant Workers Union, turning it into an extortion empire that stretched across Manhattan and into the Bronx. "I pay my workers fair," Vincent said, his Italian accent thickening with anxiety. "They have no complaints." "That's wonderful," Eddie said, flipping open the ledger. "Real heartwarming. But you see, Mr. Lombardi, your workers need union protection, benefits, security, and that protection costs money." "How much?" Eddie's finger traced down a column of numbers. "For an establishment of your size, $250, monthly." The number hit Vincent like a physical blow. $250 was more than half his monthly profit, and that was in a good month. The Depression had squeezed everyone, fewer customers, tighter wallets, suppliers constantly raising prices. He'd already laid off 2 cooks and was working 18-hour days himself to keep the lights on. "I can't afford that," Vincent said simply. Eddie closed the ledger with a soft snap. "Mr. Lombardi, let me explain something to you. This city runs on cooperation. Business owners cooperate with unions. Unions cooperate with business owners. Everybody wins." He leaned forward, his voice dropping. "But when someone doesn't cooperate, things get complicated." "Are you threatening me?" "I'm educating you." Eddie stood, buttoning his suit jacket. "You've got until Friday to make your first payment. Tony here will come by to collect. I suggest you have it ready." Vincent's jaw clenched. "And if I don't?" Tony finally spoke, his voice like gravel scraping concrete. "Restaurants are dangerous places, Mr. Lombardi. Fires, Accidents, health inspectors finding rats, suppliers suddenly refusing to deliver, workers getting ideas about strikes. He shrugged his massive shoulders. Things happen. The two men walked to the door. Eddie paused, turning back with that same cold smile. "Oh, and Mr. Lombardi, don't think about going to the cops. They're union too, if you know what I mean. See you Friday." The bell chimed again as they left, the sound absurdly cheerful. Vincent stood frozen, staring at the rain-streaked window where their silhouettes disappeared into the night. His hands gripped the counter edge until his knuckles turned white. Behind him, a door creaked. His daughter Angela emerged from the kitchen, her apron dusted with flour, her dark eyes wide with concern. At 23, she had her mother's fierce intelligence and her father's stubborn pride. "Papa, I heard everything," she said softly. "What are we going to do?" Vincent looked at his daughter, then at the photograph of his wife, then at the restaurant that represented his entire life's work. Outside, the rain continued to fall on the city that promised everything and demanded payment for every dream. "I don't know, Angela," he whispered. "I honestly don't know." The diner on West 42nd Street had seen better days. Cracked leather booths, a counter with cigarette burns scarred into the formica, and a jukebox that only played half its records. But at 2 in the morning, it was one of the few places still serving coffee, and Vincent Lombardi needed somewhere neutral to meet. Across from him sat Marcus Green, owner of Green's Soul Food Kitchen in Harlem, and Paolo Ricci, who ran a small Italian bakery on Mulberry Street. Both men looked as exhausted as Vincent felt. They'd been up for 20 hours straight, working their businesses, trying to survive. "They came to me 3 weeks ago," Marcus said, his deep voice barely above a whisper. He was a big man, mid-40s, with graying temples and hands that had worked too many years without rest. Same 2 guys. Walsh and that gorilla, Tony, wanted $300 a month. 300! Vincent's eyes widened. Why more than me? Bigger place, more tables. Marcus stirred his coffee absently. "I told them I needed time to think. Next morning my supplier called. Said he couldn't deliver no more, no explanation. When I finally got him alone, he admitted someone from the organization paid him a visit, told him Green's was off limits." Paolo Ricci rubbed his tired eyes. He was younger than the other two, maybe 35, but the stress had aged him. "I paid," he admitted, shame coloring his voice. "First month I paid. Thought maybe it would be okay, you know? Maybe they'd leave me alone after that." "And?" Vincent asked, though he already knew the answer. "Second month they wanted more, said costs were going up, union expenses." Paolo's hands trembled as he reached for his coffee. "Then they started sending inspectors, looking at my books, counting my customers. One of them suggested I needed insurance too, another $100 a month. Madonna," Vincent breathed. "It never ends." "It's a brilliant scheme," Marcus said bitterly. "They use the union as cover, makes it look legitimate. Any restaurant that doesn't join gets labeled as anti-worker. They spread rumors, send in agitators, organize protests outside your door. They destroy your reputation before they destroy your business." Vincent leaned back in the booth, the weight of it all pressing down on him. "We have to go to the police." The other 2 men exchanged glances. Paolo shook his head. "Vincent, you don't understand. The police are involved. Not all of them, maybe, but enough. Schultz has been paying off cops and politicians for years. That's how he survived Prohibition when other bootleggers went down." "There has to be someone," Vincent insisted. "A honest cop, a reporter, someone." Marcus pulled out a folded newspaper from his coat pocket and slid it across the table. The headline read, "Dutch Schultz declares war on restaurant racketeers." Vincent scanned the article, confusion growing with each line. "I don't understand. He's positioning himself as the good guy?" That's exactly what he's doing, Marcus explained. The article talks about how his union is protecting workers from exploitative owners, how he's fighting other racketeers who are supposedly shaking down restaurants. It's all backwards, but the public eats it up. Paolo leaned in, his voice urgent. 2 months ago, a guy named Jimmy Chen owned a Chinese place on Mott Street. He refused to pay, went to the newspapers, threatened to expose everything. He paused. They found his restaurant burned to the ground 3 days later. Jimmy was inside. The fire inspector called it accidental, said faulty wiring. The diner fell silent except for the hiss of the coffee maker and the distant rumble of a garbage truck outside. Vincent thought of Angela, sleeping at home, believing her father would find a way to fix this. She didn't know how deep the corruption ran, how many tentacles the Dutchman had wrapped around the city. "There's one more thing," Marcus said quietly. "I heard through the grapevine that Schultz is expanding. He's not just hitting independent restaurants anymore. He's going after the hotel chains, the big cafeterias, even the automats. He's building an empire, and he's using the Depression as cover. Everyone's so desperate to survive, they'll pay anything to avoid trouble." Vincent's mind raced. Friday was 3 days away, $250 he didn't have. Even if he scraped together every penny, borrowed from the few friends who might still lend to him, paid this month. Then what? Next month would come, and the month after that. They'd bleed him dry slowly, then move in to take the restaurant outright when he couldn't pay. "So what do we do?" Vincent asked, looking at the 2 men who'd become his unlikely allies in this nightmare. Marcus's jaw tightened. "Some of us are thinking about fighting back." "Fighting back? Against Dutch Schultz?" Paolo sounded incredulous. "The man who survived the mob wars, who has half the police force in his pocket." "Not with guns," Marcus clarified. "With organization. There are dozens of restaurant owners in the same boat, maybe hundreds. If we banded together, refused to pay as a group, went to the federal authorities, they'd kill us," Paolo interrupted. "All of us. You think the feds care about some restaurant owners? They've been trying to get Schultz for years, on bootlegging, tax evasion, everything. He's still walking free." Vincent stared at his cold coffee, seeing his reflection distorted in the dark liquid. He thought about his wife, dead 5 years now from pneumonia. She'd always been the brave one, the one who pushed him to take risks, to dream bigger. What would she tell him to do? "I need to think," Vincent said finally. "But thank you for meeting me, for telling me the truth." As they stood to leave, Marcus gripped Vincent's shoulder. "Whatever you decide, be careful. These aren't just thugs. They're organized, connected, and they've got nothing to lose. We've got everything to lose." Vincent walked out into the pre-dawn darkness of Times Square, the neon signs still blazing despite the empty streets. A police officer stood on the corner, ostensibly watching for trouble. Vincent wondered if he was on Schultz's payroll too. He turned up his collar against the cold October wind and started the long walk back to Harlem. Friday was coming, and he still had no answer. But one thing was becoming clear. Whatever choice he made, nothing would ever be the same. Thursday evening arrived too quickly. Vincent stood in his apartment above the restaurant, staring at the envelope on the kitchen table. Inside was $193, every cent he could scrape together from the register, his savings, and a small loan from his brother-in-law who'd asked no questions. It wasn't enough, not even close. Angela walked in from her shift downstairs, untying her apron. She'd been quieter than usual the past few days, watching her father with worried eyes. Now, seeing the money spread across the table, she understood. "Papa, that's everything we have," she said softly. Vincent couldn't meet her eyes. "I know. It's not enough, is it?" He shook his head. The shame burned in his chest like acid. 30 years in America, and he was being squeezed by criminals like he was nothing. Like all his work, all his sacrifice, meant nothing. Angela sat down, her hands folded on the table. When she spoke, her voice was steady, controlled, her mother's voice. "There's another option." Vincent looked up, surprised. "Jack Morrison has been asking about me," Angela continued, referring to the assistant manager at the Waldorf Astoria, where she sometimes worked catering events for extra money. "He's asked me to dinner 3 times. His family has money, Papa. Real money. If I... No." Vincent's voice was sharp, final. "Absolutely not." Why not? He's nice enough, he has prospects, he could help us." "You don't love him." Angela's laugh was bitter. "Love? Papa, we're about to lose everything. Tomorrow those men come back. What happens when you can't pay? What happens to this restaurant? To us?" Her voice cracked slightly. "Mama would have done what was necessary." The mention of his wife stung. Vincent stood abruptly, walking to the window overlooking 116th Street. Down below, the evening crowd moved through the neighborhood, workers heading home, children playing stickball in the alley, Mrs. Kowalski sweeping her stoop. Normal life, continuing as if the world wasn't ending. "Your mother," Vincent said quietly, "would have told me to fight. She wouldn't have wanted you to sacrifice yourself for this place." "Then what do we do?" Before Vincent could answer, footsteps thundered on the stairs outside. Heavy, urgent. Vincent's heart raced. Had they come early? But the knock, when it came, was frantic, desperate. He opened the door to find Marcus Green, blood streaming from a cut above his eye, his shirt torn, breathing hard. "Marcus! What happened?" Marcus stumbled inside, Angela rushing to get water and a cloth. "They came tonight," he gasped. "Didn't wait. Said I was organizing resistance, spreading rumors about the union." He winced as Angela dabbed at his wound. "4 of them. Beat me in my own kitchen. Told me I had until tomorrow to pay double, $600, or they'd burn the place down with my family inside." Vincent felt cold rage building in his chest. "Did you call the police?" Marcus's laugh was hollow. "They were there, Vincent. 2 cops, standing outside while it happened. When I came out bleeding, one of them told me to be more cooperative with union representatives." Angela's hand shook as she cleaned Marcus's wound. Vincent saw the fear in her eyes, the same fear that had been growing in his own heart. This wasn't just extortion, this was systematic terrorism, backed by the full weight of corrupt authority. "There's more," Marcus said, his voice steadier now. "After they left, a man approached me. Older guy, well-dressed, said his name was Samuel Katz, that he's a lawyer. He told me there's a federal prosecutor named Thomas Dewey who's building a case against Schultz. Real case, not the usual nonsense that gets thrown out." Vincent's pulse quickened. "A federal prosecutor? Dewey's young, ambitious, made a name going after corruption. Katz says if enough of us come forward with evidence, testimony about the extortion, Dewey might be able to bring charges that stick." Marcus looked between Vincent and Angela. "But it's dangerous. Anyone who testifies becomes a target." "How many restaurant owners has he talked to?" Vincent asked. "Dozens, maybe more. But most are too scared, and they should be. Schultz has connections everywhere. Even if Dewey builds a case, it could take months, a year. We have to survive until then." The room fell silent. Vincent thought about Jimmy Chen, burned alive in his restaurant. He thought about Marcus, beaten in his own kitchen while police watched. He thought about Angela, willing to marry a man she didn't love to save her father's dream. "I'll do it," Vincent said suddenly. "I'll talk to this lawyer." "Papa, no," Angela started. "If I pay tomorrow, it never ends," Vincent interrupted, his voice firm. "They'll bleed us dry, then take the restaurant anyway. If I fight alone, they'll destroy me. But if we fight together—" He looked at Marcus. "Maybe we have a chance." Marcus nodded slowly. "Katz gave me a number, said to call if I knew anyone else willing to testify. But Vincent, once you're in, you can't back out. Schultz finds out you're cooperating with the feds. You become a dead man walking. Then we don't let him find out. Vincent's mind was already working, thinking through the logistics. Tomorrow, when Walsh comes for his money, I tell him I need more time. A week. I'll grovel if I have to. Buy us time to coordinate with this prosecutor. They might not give you time, Marcus warned. Then I'll offer something. A partial payment. Something to show good faith while I raise the rest. Vincent's hands clenched into fists. But I won't pay full price for my own destruction. Not anymore. Angela stood, her face pale but determined. If you're doing this, Papa, then I'm helping. Someone needs to keep records, document everything. Dates, amounts, names, evidence. Vincent started to protest, but she cut him off. No, you taught me to fight for what's right. You think I'm going to sit upstairs while you do this alone? Father and daughter locked eyes, and Vincent saw his wife staring back at him through Angela's fierce gaze. Pride and terror warred in his chest. Marcus pulled himself to his feet, still unsteady but resolute. I'll call Katz tonight. Set up a meeting. The three of us, and whoever else has the guts to stand up. He extended his hand to Vincent. This could get us killed, you know. Vincent gripped his hand firmly. We're already dying, Marcus. Slowly, quietly losing everything we built. At least this way, we die fighting. After Marcus left, Vincent and Angela sat in the gathering darkness of their apartment, the money still spread on the table. Outside, the city hummed with its usual chaos, sirens shouting, the rattle of the 3rd Avenue L. Somewhere out there, Dutch Schultz sat in a luxurious office, counting his protection money, confident in his empire. Papa, Angela whispered, are we doing the right thing? Vincent pulled his daughter close, kissing the top of her head like he had when she was small. I don't know, Tesoro, but it's the only thing we can do and still look at ourselves in the mirror. Tomorrow, Eddie Walsh would come for his money, and Vincent Lombardi would begin a war he might not survive, but he would not surrender. Not his restaurant, not his dignity, not his soul. The price of doing business in Dutch Schultz's New York had become too high. Friday arrived with unseasonable warmth, the kind of October day that made New Yorkers forget winter was coming. But inside Lombardi's kitchen, the air felt thick, oppressive, despite the open windows. Vincent had barely slept. He'd spent the night rehearsing what he would say, how he would buy time without showing fear. Angela worked beside him in tense silence, preparing the lunch service they both knew might be their last. At exactly 2 o'clock, the bell above the door chimed. Eddie Walsh walked in alone this time, his suit immaculate, his expression unreadable. He surveyed the half-empty dining room. The depression had thinned the lunch crowd to a handful of regulars before his eyes settled on Vincent. Mr. Lombardi, you have something for me? Vincent wiped his hands on his apron, walked to the register, and pulled out the envelope. His hands were steady as he placed it on the counter, though his heart hammered against his ribs. Walsh opened it, counted the bills quickly. His jaw tightened. This is 200. We agreed on 250. I know, Vincent said, forcing his voice to remain calm. Business has been slow. The depression... I don't care about the depression, Walsh interrupted coldly. Everyone's got problems. That doesn't change our arrangement. I need more time. 2 weeks. I can get the rest. Time? Walsh's laugh was sharp. You think this is a negotiation? He leaned forward, his voice dropping to a whisper that somehow felt more menacing than shouting. Let me explain how this works, Mr. Lombardi. You pay what you owe when you owe it, or there are consequences. From the kitchen, Angela appeared in the doorway, her face pale, but her chin raised defiantly. Walsh noticed her, his eyes travelling over her in a way that made Vincent's stomach turn. That's your daughter? Walsh asked, though he clearly already knew. Leave her out of this, Vincent said, his voice hardening. Pretty girl. Shame if something happened to her. This city's dangerous, you know. Young women walking home alone at night. Walsh let the threat hang in the air like smoke. Something inside Vincent snapped. 30 years of bending, compromising, accepting indignities. It all crystallized into a single moment of clarity. He thought of his wife, of the life they'd built, of the envelope hidden upstairs containing the lawyer's contact information, of Marcus Green, beaten in his own kitchen, of Jimmy Chen, burned alive. "Get out," Vincent said quietly. Walsh's eyebrows rose. "Excuse me?" "I said get out." Vincent's voice grew stronger. "I'm not paying you another cent. Not today. Not ever. You want to threaten me? Fine. But I won't be extorted anymore." For a moment, Walsh looked genuinely surprised. Then his expression shifted to something darker. "You're making a mistake, old man. A fatal one." "Maybe," Vincent acknowledged, "but it's my mistake to make." Walsh's hand moved inside his jacket. Vincent's breath caught, but instead of a gun, he pulled out a small notepad. He scribbled something, tore off the page, and placed it deliberately on the counter. "That's Mr. Schultz's personal number," Walsh said softly. "When your restaurant is ashes and your daughter is in the hospital, you call that number. Maybe he'll be merciful. Maybe he won't." He pocketed the $200. "Consider this a down payment on your funeral." Walsh walked to the door, paused, and looked back. "You've got 24 hours to change your mind, Lombardi. After that, I can't help you." The door closed behind him. The bell's cheerful chime seemed obscene. Angela rushed to her father, gripping his arms. "Papa, what have you done?" "What I should have done from the beginning." Vincent was shaking now, the adrenaline draining away. "Call the lawyer, now." The meeting took place in a cramped office in Lower Manhattan, above a haberdashery shop. Samuel Katz was indeed older, perhaps 60, with wire-rimmed glasses and the weary expression of a man who'd seen too much injustice. Beside him sat Thomas Dewey, barely 30 years old, but with eyes that burned with righteous fury. Vincent, Angela, Marcus, and 4 other restaurant owners crowded into the small space. Paolo Ricci had come, along with an Irish pub owner named O'Brien, a Jewish delicatessen owner named Goldstein, and a Greek diner owner named Papadopoulos. Each had their own story of extortion, violence, and corruption. Dewey listened to them all, taking meticulous notes, his pen scratching across legal paper. When they finished, he set down his pen and looked at each of them in turn. "Gentlemen and Miss Lombardi, what you're describing is a criminal conspiracy involving racketeering, extortion, assault, and corruption of public officials. If I can build a solid case, I can bring charges under federal statutes that will bypass the local courts Schultz has corrupted." "How long?" Marcus asked. "We don't have much time." "Weeks, maybe months." Dewey's honesty was brutal. "I need documentation, witnesses, evidence that will hold up in court. And I need you all to be prepared for what comes next. Schultz won't sit idle while I build a case against him." "He'll come after us," O'Brien said flatly. "Yes," Dewey acknowledged, "which is why I'm coordinating with the FBI. Federal agents can provide some protection, but I won't lie to you. You're all in danger the moment you sign these affidavits." Vincent thought of Walsh's threat, of the 24 hours ticking away. "What choice do we have? We either fight or we die slowly." Dewey smiled grimly. "Then let's fight smart. Katz will take your statements. Document everything, dates, amounts, names of collectors, corrupt officials. Keep duplicate records in safe locations. And for God's sake, be careful. Don't discuss this with anyone outside this room." For the next 3 hours, they gave their testimony. Angela's meticulous records proved invaluable. She'd been documenting everything since Walsh's first visit, including the names of the enforcers, the amounts demanded, even descriptions of their vehicles. As the meeting broke up, Dewey pulled Vincent aside. "Mr. Lombardi, I want you to know something. What you're doing takes extraordinary courage. But courage doesn't make you bulletproof. Watch your back. Trust no one outside this group." I understand. One more thing. Dewey's voice dropped lower. We have reason to believe Schultz is planning something big, a consolidation of his entire restaurant racket. If we can catch him in the act, with multiple witnesses and federal agents present, we can end this. But timing is everything. Vincent felt a chill despite the warm evening. What do you need from me? Keep your eyes open, report anything unusual, and whatever you do, stay alive long enough to testify. Vincent and Angela walked home through the darkening streets of Manhattan, acutely aware of every shadow, every car that slowed as it passed. When they finally reached Lombardi's kitchen, they found the front window intact, the door locked as they'd left it, but inside someone had left a message. On every table, every chair, every surface, they'd placed a single wooden match, hundreds of them, covering the restaurant like snow. The meaning was unmistakable. Angela gasped, gripping her father's arm. Vincent felt rage and fear war inside him, but beneath it all, something else emerged: determination. They want us to be afraid, he said quietly, picking up one of the matches. They want us to run. Papa, maybe we should... No! Vincent struck the match against the box Walsh had left on the counter, watching the flames spring to life. I'm done running. He walked to the small shrine he kept in the corner, where a photo of his wife sat beside a candle. He lit the candle with the match, then blew out the match and dropped it into the trash. Tomorrow we open for business as usual, Vincent declared. We cook, we serve, we live, and we trust that Dewey can do what he promised. Angela looked at her father, this man who'd crossed an ocean for a better life, who'd built something from nothing, who'd lost his wife but kept going. She saw in him something she'd never fully appreciated before. Not just love, not just stubbornness, but an unbreakable core of integrity that no amount of threats could corrupt. Then we fight, she said simply. That night, Vincent Lombardi barely slept again, but this time it wasn't from fear. It was from hope, fragile, dangerous hope that maybe, just maybe, justice could triumph over power. 3 weeks later, the newspapers called it the restaurant racket raids. At dawn, on November 3, 1933, federal agents simultaneously raided 23 locations across New York City. They arrested 47 individuals, including Eddie Walsh, Tony the Enforcer, and a dozen corrupt police officers and union officials. Dutch Schultz himself wasn't caught that day. He'd gotten wind of the operation and fled to New Jersey. But the evidence gathered from the raids, combined with the testimony of Vincent Lombardi and 32 other restaurant owners, was damning. Thomas Dewey's case made headlines across the country. The youngest federal prosecutor in New York had taken on one of the city's most powerful crime lords and won. But victory came with a price. 2 days after the raids, Vincent was locking up the restaurant when a car slowed on the street outside. He froze, remembering Walsh's threat. But instead of gunfire, a newspaper landed at his feet. The headline read, "Schultz Empire Crumbling. Prosecutor Dewey hailed as hero." And beneath it, in smaller text, "Restaurant owner's testimony key to conviction." Vincent picked up the paper, scanning the article. His name was mentioned, along with Marcus Green and the others. They were being called brave, heroes even. But Vincent knew the truth. They weren't heroes. They were just men and women who'd refused to accept that survival required surrendering their souls. He looked up at the apartment window where Angela was waiting, then at the restaurant that had almost cost him everything. The American dream, he'd learned, wasn't something you achieved once and kept forever. It was something you fought for every single day. The bell above the door chimed as Angela came down, concern on her face. "Papa, your name is in the paper. Everyone will know you testified." "Let them know," Vincent said, folding the newspaper under his arm. "I'm not hiding anymore." Marcus appeared from around the corner, walking with a slight limp from his beating but grinning widely. Behind him came O'Brien, Goldstein, and Papadopoulos. the small army of restaurant owners who'd stood together. "Drinks?" Marcus suggested. "I think we've earned it." They walked together through the November evening, 6 restaurant owners from different worlds, Italian, Black, Irish, Jewish, Greek, united by a common enemy and a common courage. Behind them, the lights of New York blazed against the darkening sky, a city of millions where dreams and nightmares lived side by side, where corruption and justice waged an eternal war. Dutch Schultz would eventually be hunted down, though it would take another 2 years before he'd face his final reckoning. Thomas Dewey would go on to become governor of New York, nearly becoming president. But that November evening, none of that mattered. What mattered was that ordinary people had stood against extraordinary evil and refused to bend. Vincent Lombardi's restaurant survived the Depression. It survived the war that followed. It would survive for another 40 years, eventually passed down to Angela's children, who would tell their own children about the grandfather who'd faced down the mob and won. Not with violence, not with money, but with something more powerful, the simple, stubborn refusal to let fear dictate how he lived. The price of doing business in New York had been high, but Vincent Lombardi had proven that some prices were too high to pay, and some things, dignity, integrity, justice, were worth any risk to preserve. As they reached Marcus's restaurant and stepped inside to celebrate, Vincent paused at the threshold, looking back at the city that had tested him so thoroughly. "Thank you," he whispered to his wife's memory, to the dream that had brought them here, to the courage that had kept them going. Then he walked inside to join his friends, a free man in a city learning, slowly, painfully, that freedom was never given, only taken and defended by those brave enough to fight for it. Dutch Schultz was shot and killed in October 1935 at the Palace Chop House in Newark, New Jersey, in a hit ordered by the Commission, the mafia's governing body, who felt he'd become too reckless and violent. His restaurant extortion empire collapsed with his death. Thomas Dewey used the publicity from the restaurant racket case to launch prosecutions against organized crime figures throughout New York, eventually becoming Manhattan District Attorney, then Governor of New York, and narrowly losing the 1948 presidential election. Vincent Lombardi's restaurant, Lombardi's Kitchen, remained a Harlem institution until 1973, when Vincent retired at age 92. His daughter Angela ran it for another decade before selling to a family friend, ensuring that the legacy and the story lived on. The matches that had been left as a threat were kept in a frame behind the counter, a reminder that fear can only control those who let it.